Trials and Tribulations, where we break down the latest FDA revelations. DAPs, that's the talk of the day. Diversity action plans paving the way. Diversity and trials, that's what we preach. Inclusivity for all, it's within our reach. FDA's draft, we're breaking it down. All diversity trials, the best part around. FDA, please, we need the shift. Diversity and trials, let's uplift. DAP, yeah, you know me. Inclusivity for all, it's the key. Diversity and trials, that's what we preach. Inclusivity for all, it's within our reach. FDA's draft, we're breaking it down. All diversity trials, the best part around.
Hello. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Top of the morning to you all. It's not March. I have no idea why I did that. Good morning, everyone. Mitch, howdy. I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn today. Someone posted a meme that they saw on Reddit, and I thought, I recognize that meme. I know that. I made that meme. I actually have a meme that made it to Reddit. You remember the one of the dude on the stairs talk about trying to skip all the levels to a CRA level position? It's on Reddit.
But I did it. Nice. That's awesome.
It's on Reddit. I was like, well, I made it to Reddit. Interesting.
You made it to Reddit. Congrats.
Yep. Anyway. So.
One more achievement to add
Little
on your
victories.
Right. Yeah, update that CV with
can I put that on my CV?
I would.
I had a meme on Reddit.
I would.
All right. Sorry about that. Welcome to DiversiTrials and Tribulations, everyone. The last new section level. There's still two more. We're going to do summary and final, but this is the last new content. What a journey. Oh my gosh. Reading sections 8 and 9. I don't know if I have more questions or more concerns, but point is, we got through it, everyone. It only took 5 or 6 hours of online content to get through the whole thing, but we did it. Before we start on the SWOT, I feel like I want to play Pomp and Circumstance or something. I mean, Mitch and Hadi, how do you feel after reading the entire guidance in entirety? The whole thing.
Several times over.
Several times
exhausted. Over. No, I'm looking forward to wrapping this up. I know when we first kicked off the series, we started bringing up some of the regulations, some of the comments we had. We reviewed some of the comments that were already posted on the FDA website regarding the guidance. And, this is kind of closing that loop from some of those comments from Anonymous that we initially talked about in today's section. So I'm really think more so looking forward to the next couple weeks, doing an overall review. We're going to have additional guests on to talk through the summaries and get additional voices and thoughts and opinions as well. So it's been good. And I think I agree with you that something you said earlier today was where, from my initial read through, my opinions on certain things have actually kind of changed a little bit, or at least how I've absorbed that information time and time again. It sits a little bit different as far as the perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was exhausting, but it was a good opportunity for us to really digest it slowly but surely, in some ways. And as you said, Mitch, to your point, it just feels a little different right now. Yes, there are some, I wouldn't say challenges, but opportunities to work on to make it better. But it's a great start. We're grateful for FDA.
Yay. Cheerleader FDA. All right, let's move over to the SWOT analysis from last time. So we're going to go to, hopefully, see, I'm getting better. It only took the last episode for me to figure out how to do it better.
Yep.
All right. Who's doing strengths?
I can take it.
All right.
Well, as we said, it was actually the FDA. I mean, the purpose of this section um, was it 5? No, this is not 5. B and C, no.
No, this is section
Nope.
6 and 7.
6 and 7, correct. So the purpose of section 6 and 7 were actually relayed, I would think, like, clearly, and it showed that FDA is clearly communicating its willingness to offer guidance to sponsors at their request to develop enrollment goals of the clinically relevant population. So that's a good start, right? But it has to be more enforced, and we can talk about that, like, in the subsequent the sections. The device section, we thought, or I thought, that it was like a little more detailed than the drug section. It provided more details and information, including but not limited to recommendations to include DAP in public-facing summary documents, and that was actually reflected in line 619. So that's what we have for the strengths right now.
Limited strengths on 6 and 7. If you hadn't had a chance to watch this review, this one got the one paragraph that neutered the entire guidance. We talked a lot about our concerns, the loopholes, so to speak, that might have been built in for sponsors, what was really required as a statutory requirement versus what was not. Might be worth a view. Maybe we'll do a couple clips to, the highlights of that, just really big paragraphs. I'll take the weaknesses because why not? So lines 469 to 470, and notice, and I apologize, everyone, we had to make really small fonts for the weaknesses on these sections. So clearly and concisely, with limited cross-referencing to previously submitted documents, kind of contradicts the overall guidance. Maybe the person who talked about clear and concise documentation may want to talk to your other authors that didn't think that way. Lines 435 and 439, as soon as practicable, Hadi's favorite reference. It's confusing and it's open to bias and interpretation, and maybe it just seems like, I don't know, slimy almost. Like you're not really guiding anything, you're just covering your butt. Line 490, may or may not. I think it's the same thing. It's just slimy. This isn't a disclosure on a pack of cigarettes. This isn't anything like that. This is a guidance. It's supposed to help sponsors, not make them question things. 529 to 620, pretty long section. Although it was detailed, the entire device section is weaved with confusion, leaving the industry uncertain of DAP requirements and expectations versus recommendations. So just, I didn't really feel guided after reading it, and it's kind of tricky. So there's inconsistency with the inclusion of ethnicity in the requirements throughout the guidance. In other words, in the different sections, you could tell it's different authors because they didn't include ethnicity versus they did. And as Mitch had said, it's just among other categories instead of actually being spelled out. But then it actually comes back in the appendix. So maybe the authors might want to have a little bit of a round table to make that a little more consistent. Lines 480 through 482, it's a possible typo. Great job, Mitch. Really good catch. A possible typo compared to the device subsection in line 548. This should cover, the cover letter should accompany an IND instead of a diversity action plan. Maybe. I'd love to get a thank you from FDA saying, yeah, good catch. That's great. We can all wish. So lines 480 through 488, it does not include options for multi-study DAP processes described in previous sections. And I really do think that this is going to come back in the sections we're going to talk about, because they started talking about multi-study submissions, and they started talking about how, anyway, we'll go with that. But I don't know if they have the guidance in there on how to document these multi-study submissions for DAPs. It just wasn't there. It was literally just not there.
Yeah.
The term may, I think, again, this is from a different author, and actually may is used many times in this next section. I think may, we might need to define that in the introduction section, line 65 and 75, because it's used very similar to must and should. We really need to understand what the FDA means by that term may. It's not in there. Section 7 drug subsection is vague compared to the device subsection. We could tell it was different voices. It includes potentially supportive information such as addition of DAP and public-facing summary. That's going to come back in Section 9. We'll talk about that, and actually Section 8. We'll be touching on that. And finally, footnote 80. Many references may be outdated or obsolete versus the needs of an innovative new guidance. So again, if you use old guidances, you're really not going to be that helpful in a new guidance. You're just going to be repeating the history. So
yeah, we talked about some of the where, I mean, it was 11 plus years, right? You know.
Oh yeah, you could take some of these, take some of the footnote guidances out for a beer, right? For a drink.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We did have that 21-year-old guidance.
All right, so that's the weaknesses. I've said enough. Mitch, how about opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we noted in here for where we could improve is describing who might be reviewing the DAPs. You know, my thoughts immediately kind of go to, well, logically to me, there should be some involvement from the FDA's Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, but it's not clear like really which part, I guess, of the FDA is going to be overall responsible for diversity action plan review, and if it's going to be outsourced to someone else, and kind of really maybe what are those qualifications that they're looking for in order to, you know, be a reviewer of diversity action plans. Specifically, is there some sort of additional training or oversight committee reviewing diversity action plans, right? Again, we talk about May a lot throughout the guidance. Section 6 as well, you know, as 7. But I mean, Section 6 kicks off as, although sponsors may discuss the diversity action plans with FDA as soon as practicable. You know, I think there's an opportunity there to maybe change may to, you know, is encouraged to, right? So maybe let's see about how we can maybe wordsmith it a little bit to find some more direct words to be used, direct phrases to be used instead of may. Separating the device requirements into their own guidance for clarity is something we talked about. Or, you know, also there's that opportunity to then just create a better process map, right? If then's kind of a whole workflow of helping people understand what those expectations are, when guidance is required, when DAPs are required, when they're not. Although they are encouraged all the time, I would kind of like almost dislike to see a process map that shows how little they are required per se, when we want to encourage them always as part of programs. As needed, indicating cover letters. That's another one we talked about a little bit in the weakness sections as well. The cover letters, the IND submissions, and the separate sections having the different languages as well, including descriptions in the drug sections about public-facing summary documents was in devices. That was, you know, that was positive. We want to see consistent language between the two. And, you know, I know Fox, you were already bringing up that it was kind of evident that there was different authors for different sections. So finding maybe some better alignment. While I don't like copy and paste as a general rule, if you find a stronger way between multiple authors to word something, that's probably, you should try to, you know, form that consistency there. Innovative guidance may need to use more current references. Yeah, because, you know, as we talked about, 21 years old, how innovative is that at this point? And then also really, you know, I think there's an opportunity there to be a little bit more specific on what we're talking about as how we're defining innovative, because every single organization out here in this industry thinks that whatever they're doing is innovative. Like you might be changing one tiny little thing and then you have this innovative new product. And while innovation, you know, maybe organization specific, you know, we might have an innovative new way for our company, you know, at DiversiTrials to work on like education or something. However, it's not necessarily innovative or unique, you know, to the public or as a whole. And then for broader application and cultural competency and proficiency training, you know, we looked at when we discussed the responsibilities between the site and the sponsor and kind of those language differences where we're using a lot of the same terminology throughout the industry, and it kind of starts to blur the lines of, well, what exactly do you mean here? Because that's something that I do too. Like I do community engagement as a site, right? So what are you talking about that the sponsor needs to do? But then also changing, some of that verbiage, of provide to offer, being able to offer some of those services with decentralized trials or strategies. And the same thing with cultural competency training, is offering that training or providing that training. What is it we're kind of looking for? Or at least, have an expectation that the sponsors have that clear in their DAPs as well, on how are they providing it, or are they requiring it? Are they offering the training? What is it that they're doing to make sure that the cultural competency training portion is taken care of?
Perfect. And Hadi, I hope you got your magnifying glass on. I think this is the most number of threats we've had.
I zoomed in with my other screen and I'm able to read it. Okay.
Okie dokie.
So let's take this over. Threats. There are so many things to talk about here. And we'll go over that. Okay. So overall, Section 7 compromised the premise of the entire guidance by limiting statutory requirements with optional and non-enforceable adjustments and mitigations without consequences. So again, the threat to me and to all of us was like, sometimes it's enforceable, sometimes may, the sponsors may request, we may, or FDA may, provide feedback. So it's all up in the air, correct? There's no real, trajectory as to what's going to happen and what sponsors are supposed to do. Now, all sections, including this one, specifically between lines 441 to 445, indicate that as soon as practicable. First of all, I have a problem spelling this word. Then it's like, what does it really mean, right? Can't you even use another word? But again, this is like, so hazy for me, and then when it comes to lines 435 and 439, will likely not be enough time, potentially making phase 3 trials or studies as statutory deadlines set a sponsor up, which will set a sponsor up for failure. Now, they have to be more clearly defining the timeline and enforce that timeline with consequences, not as soon as practicable or, before phase 3. I mean, that really opens up a whole, Pandora's box, in my opinion. So now the annual reports, and this is actually reflected in lines 509 to 517, 594 to 599, do not clearly define process requirements, as we just discussed, or Mitch maybe discussed, including but not limited to the responsible parties and due dates as they relate to diversity action plans submissions. Again, I mean, we need more clarity, and this is considered a threat. Because it's like, it can be interpreted, differently from different sponsors and across the board. So more clarity and definition should probably go in there, or at least definitely should go there. Lines 509 to 517, sponsors must include that into their IND annual reports. However, all other activities state sponsors should. And again, must, should, may. These are really, really confusing to the reader to start off with. And then there's no consistency in the presentation in terms of this is what needs to be done, period, okay, without leaving room for, confusion. So that is indicating the only statutory mandate is to report, not to adjust or mitigate such outcomes. Further consequences such as not approving an IND application are not clarified, and the event sponsors do not meet or demonstrate they are trying to meet their DAP enrollment goals. So I think there should be a better work done around this area. Lines 594 to 595, again, must is not included in the device section, device IDE annual reports for DAPs, and again, indicating that although sponsors should include DAP enrollment goal progress, it's not statutory as it is with drugs, and mitigation correction is optional. So again, this leaves a lot. There's no consistency, first of all, between the drugs and the device sections. And again, we indicated that different authors will have to probably work together and better presenting this to the audience or to the reader. And then there should be more consistency in terms of using those must and should and may around this tab. Now, the biggest, personally, as an epidemiologist, the biggest, threat to me was I found it in lines 522 and 523, where it indicated that sponsors are asked to explain a bias that cannot be viable or validated. So, if you're indicating that there is a bias.
Yeah.
When you explain a bias, then your study is really not, validated, period. And then it's not generalizable in terms of external validity. So that's a big, big, big threat. So sponsors are not appropriate stakeholders to speak on enrollment goals. The correct stakeholders in this query is the site.
And it's really important to note, and for all of you who are listening out there, I get it. FDA is not in the business to make mandates. FDA always just makes recommendations. It's not their wheelhouse. So when you are asking FDA to put mandates into a guidance, it kind of throws them for a loop. Prime example, and if you look at the guidance right now, on top of every single page, just like any other guidance you'd see, it says contains non-binding recommendations. There are binding recommendations in here, and I think that makes FDA a little uncomfortable because that's not what they do. Right. And I get that. I get that very much. This is a new realm for FDA when they're kind of pulled into statutory requirements. And if you really think about it, this could be, I don't want to call it quite historical, but it is a little rare for FDA to kind of be forced to enforce things.
Yeah, well, I think to summarize all those, and with the threats that Hadi was just talking about as well, when you bring up the statutory requirements, in that ultimately there has to be a discussion and reportings to Congress, right? Mm-hmm. When we already spoke previously about, really it would be better to have some more granularity on what's going to be reported specifically, what those expectations are, like explain what it is that you're going to have to report to Congress. That would be great. So then, as a community, we can work better to address and support those comments that you have to report to the Congress, right? Mm-hmm. But if a part of that includes those, those reasons why, that speculation on, we didn't meet our diversity goals, here's why we think it didn't work, and you're just throwing out these biases all over the place that aren't grounded necessarily in fact. It's just mm-hmm. mere speculation. And then we're discussing these as, potential concerns or potential reasons. I just don't see, I see almost more harm than benefit in there.
Yeah, because you're giving a false promise or even a crutch or even a false positive on what you could be doing. My right. biggest concern is FDA doesn't even recognize community research sites as stakeholders. They'll look at PIs and investigators but anyway, that's another thing. Let's move on to today's topic. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and we'll start up and let's get down to business here, everyone. So very, very short section. I don't think it may even take the whole hour. We'll see how the conversation goes. We'll see how the community pipes in. Section 8, requesting diversity action plan waivers. Oh boy, here's the loophole, everyone. This is sponsors love this, right? Yeah, right. Anyway, we'll go into exactly how FDA structures this. So we talk a little bit about loopholes, some timelines, some structure. This is how you might be documenting it, sending a waiver into the FDA. And then a super short section. Honestly, I don't even know why this is a section. This could have been built in other things. But section 9, sponsored public posting of key information from diversity action plans. It's short, but when we get to here, I would challenge you to think about consequences of this public posting for sponsors, consequences of a lot of things, politics, PR. things like that. That's what I'd really like to talk about. So not necessarily the content itself, but the consequence of the content.
Right. But even then, before, I mean, we're not there yet, but it's also kicks off as strongly encourages.
Yeah.
So
I see this sponsor is going to see the top of that and be like, okay, skip that section. Don't care.
yeah. Oh, I don't have to do this? Great.
Oh, okay. But in all sincerity, I have some questions about this one. Let's start at the top. Hadi, what did you think? I mean, Hadi, Mitch, take turns. What do you think about the sections?
Yeah. Section 9. I mean, in my opinion, you just said like this is a loophole that will create a loophole to sponsors. I mean, the minute they see a section, solely just allocated and to discussing waivers, they're gonna jump all over it. They're gonna find
They're
loopholes.
going to try.
Yeah, and they're gonna just like
Right.
find loopholes and go through all those I don't know 545Z for whatever sections, and so they're gonna try to actually get out of it. Period.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not really sure. I mean, whether it's a good idea or not to really have a specific section tailored to waivers or not, but it is what it is right now. That's my concern, my first concern. Next, because I'd like to see that every single sponsor with every single study that they submit a DAP in time. So again, FDA may waive the requirements to submit a diversity action plan, and that's reflected on in lines 626, 627, or any part thereof, either on the agency's initiative or at a sponsor's request if certain criteria are met.
Well, so wait, if I read that right, does that mean FDA can tell the sponsor, yeah, upon our review of it, you don't need a DAP?
Exactly. So
suppose they could.
You may or may not.
May or may not, exactly. So yeah, that was a little, disheartening, I guess. I do understand that the waiver is necessary to protect public health during a public health emergency, and that's under point C on line 638.
Yeah.
How often does this happen? And I don't know. I mean, we can open it.
Well, that's that was the thing that I
remember Anonymous 2.
That was Anonymous.
Anonymous 2. This is the one they hated. I guess my question is 638. I'm trying to think, what is the logic behind that? Do they think that DAPs are going to slow the process down and therefore they might need to move faster without a DAP? Is that why they think a waiver might be necessary?
Well, and using the recent COVID, I mean, we know that, minorities were actually more affected than others. So I think, in my opinion, DAP should be probably really placed there. But again, so...
Well, and that's...
in the interest of time and, a public health emergency, I don't know how this is going to play out. But it's important to keep an eye on underserved and minorities, underserved population, because they're probably affected.
They're part of the public.
Right. It's part of the right. And,
yes.
I mean, taking into consideration the social determinants of health. I mean, I have mixed feelings about this. So I don't really... I don't honestly completely agree with it, but it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
So part of me says, and we kind of hopped around everyone, but A, B, and C is like their grocery list. This is what FDA is going to review in the case that FDA or the sponsor consider or request a waiver. The first one is that a waiver is necessary based off of what is known or what can be determined about the prevalence or incidence of the disease. Okay. I get it. So if you're in a certain population who only this one demographic is going to be your consumer of the drug, or the one who has the prevalence, okay, maybe you don't have to do a giant diversified DAP analysis. As long as you can demonstrate that the majority of the disease happens in this demographic. I get that. B, conducting a clinical investigation in accordance with the diversity action plan that would be impractical. Here's the interpretation how do you define impracticable? Is that a one-off? That seems, is it, okay, this disease is so rare. This is the first one we've ever encountered ever in the world.
Very subjective.
It would be impractical to try to find that disease across other demographics.
Ties in with practicable versus impracticable.
Yeah. So, okay. And then a waiver is necessary to protect public health during a public health emergency. When I read that, and this is where my opinion changed, going back to Section 7 and seeing how low the bar was for statutory requirements, I'm
Right.
thinking to myself, how can you not do this? I mean, they're not asking you to do too much. In fact, you already have that information in your demographics from your source or what you might be collecting. It's literally just putting it together. I don't understand, unless going back to speed. Do they really think it's going to delay the process during a public health emergency?
Right. So I'll jump in here as well. So I do want to give kudos to a degree. They start off Section 8 saying that they anticipate that the submission of diversity action plan will be possible in most cases. Right. Like they do kind of start it off with like, look, you're going to need to submit one, but there are going to be limited exceptions to this rule. However, my thoughts regarding A and B, the waiver is necessary based on what's known or can be determined about the prevalence in the U.S. of the disease. And then B is conducting it in accordance with a diversity action plan would be otherwise impracticable. Those are illogical entirely to me, because you draft the diversity action plan as previously discussed in the guidance based on prevalence of disease, based on just generalized demographics in the US. I mean, so there's all these ways that you can draft a diversity action plan. And then also, as we discussed, there's still that aspect of, well, if you don't hit those goals of the diversity action plan, they want you to be able to speculate as to why they weren't able to be met. And maybe that's, you gathered additional information and we understand better the disease prevalence, based off of this study or based off of these studies in this program. So it seems a little bit illogical that you wouldn't require a plan for the same reasons why you should and how you should build a diversity action plan to begin with. I mean, that's at least how I'm perceiving these. Because if you have the prevalence information of the disease in the U.S., then that's what you're creating your diversity action plan off of. That's what they literally tell you in the guidance. That's what you should use to create the plan. So a waiver is ridiculous.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Mitch, because I did make a tally marker of every time FDA in this section kind of hinted at chances of a waiver are slim. Don't bank on it. This isn't a loophole. And I think the best one ever was right here in 644, 645. There's like the results of full or partial waivers from the requirements around the submissions of a diversity action plan will only be granted in rare instances.
Yep.
Don't bank on a waiver. It's not a loophole. This is a, case study, one case at a time, discretion at the FDA. Don't try to circumvent this, because it's going to happen. And this goes back to the whole, dude, the bar's low. Just submit the DAP. I mean, there's only one thing you must do according to Section 7. Just do it. Come on.
Yep. And then, point C is a waiver necessary to protect public health during a public health emergency. That also, I mean, it feels more like insultingly illogical to me. I don't know of a nicer way to say that. And I don't mean to offend anybody who came up with these waiver ideas, but the impact is generally greater on underserved and underrepresented communities, especially when it comes to natural disasters, public health issues, etc. So granting a waiver that says, oh, yeah, no, it's fine. We don't really care about anything. We just want to pump out some information as fast as we can to try to approve something. Like it's a little bit illogical. Like you almost need to be strategically more swift, right? You need to be fast. We need to work hard. We need to be diligent, but we also have to still ensure safety the entire time, because you can compound the public health emergency to a greater issue.
Get a DAP in place. Yeah.
I mean, it just, some of those comments from Anonymous that we previously reviewed address those same points. And they talked about essentially using the power of the NIH purse to make sure that Moderna included diverse folks in their COVID trials, and the vaccine ended up being much more effective because of it, as a comparator to some of the other vaccines. At least that's what their comments were. They hit on the head. I think also coming from like the emergency medical background that I have, and we talk about like disaster preparedness and, you know, emergency management. These public health disasters are all part of emergency management. And as a whole, emergency management, I think, for the country has been not great. There's been tons and tons of people talking about and pushing for how we address public health emergencies. You know, if something like a COVID were to have hit, what's going to happen? How can we move forward? And having those plans and procedures and processes kind of already mapped out in place, which we really didn't. We didn't have that. So I think there needs to be a lot more consideration and thought that goes into that point, maybe removing that point altogether, because there's no simpler way to say it. As I said when Hadi was talking about it, they're part of the public. So if it's a public health emergency, it affects everyone in the public. So you're not going to just suddenly discredit the public as a whole and grant a waiver. You don't have to consider all of who the public is in a public health emergency.
Yep. And I won't go as far as Anonymous 2 to say the people who wrote this should be, you know, disbarred or dismissed, or they don't know what they're talking about, whatever it might be. But I agree completely. It doesn't make sense. And that's why I really want to understand why. Why do you think a waiver is necessary during a public health emergency? Is it a speed thing? Is it a time thing? What is it about a public health emergency that you think would even merit maybe a little more clarification on the logic process behind that, rather than, you know, because it doesn't make sense to me either. So I need to understand what was in their mind.
Right. Well, Anonymous specifically, you know, questioned, I have it pulled up here still too, is they questioned whether the person who wrote this, you know, had the necessary expertise to be leading on this effort. And I mean, it's kind of to a degree what I was talking about earlier on who's reviewing diversity action plans. Because I would like to think, considering the topic, that the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity would be involved in that process. I would like to see that they were all over this document and this guidance, because that's where the majority of the impact is going to be when we're talking about diversity action plans. At least it's a better voice from the FDA, is that specific office to be in.
I would personally like to see all points A, B, C rewritten, redrafted, or scratched out.
In other words, there are no waivers.
Sounds good to me. I mean, it's not that hard to write a diversity action plan.
No, and that's what I mean is I don't understand why waivers are a thing. Because Mitch, as you said, and this goes back to the whole theme of the entire guidance, this isn't a phase 3 thing. This is a phase 0 thing. If you're doing in phase 0, why do you need a waiver in the first place? I don't understand. I get it. You need contingencies and provisions and things like that, but it doesn't quite make sense. Yeah. And this goes back to, Mitch, what you were saying. How do we know if they're the right credentialed, experienced, validated people are making these decisions? And this is where I had a question. They start to stratify waivers. You can get a full waiver or a partial waiver on 639 and 640, which tells me, okay, what exactly are you going to make an exception from? If you have a partial waiver, what is absolutely hands down? How can you even classify a partial waiver? What can you eliminate from a diversity action plan versus what is absolutely mandatory?
I don't know, man.
I would love to see
a breakdown. I mean, I had a personal issue with this as well. It's like, you know, what does it really constitute a full waiver as opposed to partial waiver? Why are we talking about that here? You know, one more thing I wanted to discuss, like if a sponsor wants to apply for a waiver, they would probably have to pay an exorbitant amount of money.
Right, we talk about costs. Yep, all the filings.
To go into, regardless of filing, they will have to actually pay, I don't know how much, but this money should go into community programs.
Good idea, Hadi.
So, Pharma A, if you're applying for a waiver for this drug, for this study, you know, then you will have to pay $3 million, $5 million, $10 million, I don't care, with this community, in this, you know, whatever geographic location, to promote or at least, you know, increase awareness and address whatever you need to address. But this has to be tied up to some kind of a, fund a funding mechanism that goes into the community.
You know what just clicked in my mind? It goes back to section 7. You remember that paragraph that defined musts and should? There's only one must, a bunch of shoulds. I'll bet you that's your partial versus full. A partial waiver to meet statutory requirements is only providing demographics for enrollment reporting versus and so you get we'll give you a partial waiver. Just give us what we need for statutory requirements and we'll waive the rest of the DAP.
Right. Well, the rest of the stuff's just the recommendations anyways, not really requirements. So it's like, I don't really know what they mean by partial waiver. It's not clear. And I think it would obviously be case by case basis, but I mean, it seems a little illogical. Like, oh, we want you to still collect race information and should have targets for race, but we'll forget ethnicity. I'm not sure what they mean by partial waivers in that respect, but Hadi, obviously, like the FDA can't say, oh, we're going to require you to, pay a certain amount of money, I think, for some sort of program.
Otherwise, they wouldn't actually approve any drug.
Well, right. But I mean, I think my concern with that, though, too, especially if you tie it to waivers, my only thought behind that is, okay, well, if I'm a sponsor and I'm like, oh, I can just pay my way out of having a waiver and we'll pay and make ourselves look good because we're going to give a bunch of money to some community program to get out of having to have waivers for a drug. Like that might be a little bit misleading.
Waivers should be scrutinized anyway, and it's like it's only approved in rare instances. Yeah. But when and if and when these are approved, then it should be tied up to some kind of a bigger, wider community programs. That's my opinion.
Well, I mean, community engagement's even one of those things that's recommended for sponsors to begin with. So I mean, if you're already on board to get that heavy into contributing with community engagement out and outreach and
not all of them do that anyway, and they scratch out all the budgets, the item budgets when it comes to community programs. So this should be highlighted.
So this might follow up to some of our questions, but it might also be the consequence that we were looking for. You know how 483s are like a death sentence to sites or really, really bad. So it does say here that if in line 6 starts at line 645 and it goes down through a little bit, but it pretty much just says if we determine a waiver is appropriate, and then again, such as the need to protect public health during a public health emergency. They said it again. I don't get it.
To protect public health. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you protecting public health by excluding diverse populations? That'd be a really good logic. I'll bet you it's time. I bet you they think that in the event of that, it's, no questions asked, just get the thing approved without additional red tape.
But it's that iron triangle that Jess Thompson taught me. It's, time, quality, so you have time is your speed to get it out.
But here's the
quality, and then your cost.
Here's the part. It says FDA will notify interested parties through appropriate channels. For example, to the extent permitted under law, in other words, we can't break the law or break confidentiality, FDA may consider, there's may again, we need that definition, public communications and posts relevant to the information on the FDA's website regarding the decision. So there could be a public shaming for waiver, so to speak, if FDA puts this on their website that this big pharma company asked for a waiver on diversity, and they might put it on their website. That could be a motivator for sponsors just not to get a waiver. In other words, we don't want that PR if FDA puts this on their website.
Yeah, if you have one sponsor that keeps requesting waivers all the time.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of
sponsor's not. I mean, could you imagine the media picking that up and being like, oh? So there might be a public pressure not to request a waiver, is my guess. That's kind of the way the FDA carved it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's still on that like public health emergency aspect and protecting the public health. When even if we talk about like COVID, right? There was so much. It's not. Everybody also talks about like, oh, it's going to cost more. It's going to cost more to do these for sponsors. It can cost a lot more to get drugs out. That's a lot of the complaints that I see. I wonder where they're coming from. But with COVID, there's so much government money and funding that went into those. it's not like they lost money. You know what I mean? Like we brought up like Moderna vaccine before.
Oh gosh.
Moderna wasn't hurting. You know, they weren't they weren't in the red because of COVID with, you know, making these vaccines. They were getting paid for it, you know. So as far as funding in a public health emergency isn't going to be just the sole responsibility of some pharmaceutical company. It's the responsibility of the public and the government, right? So the funding would go into addressing those public health needs, which might be, you know, vaccines, whatever it may be, to address those issues. And that's where the funding is going to come from. So it still just makes no sense that we would grant a waiver for anything.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think in a nicer level of words, we tend to agree with Anonymous too, and their heated opinion about this section and the people who wrote it.
Well, it might
now,
be good.
I have a rarity.
biases.
Normally, it's very rare that you see this in a guidance, but section 658, and this is where there's got to be some things that we don't know. FDA is required to issue written response granting or denying a waiver request within 60 days of receiving such a request. FDA is giving themselves a deadline, folks.
Yep.
That doesn't happen.
Yep.
So maybe this has something to do with the statutory levels, whatever it might be. But FDA is giving their sponsors a timeline. Like, look, this is our timeline. We have to give you a response in 60 days of submission. But to make this work, here's your deadline. You're going to have to give this to us as soon as feasible, as early as feasible in line number 660. But don't bank on giving this to us 60 days before it's required. I think in this section, they don't talk about consequence. It would be really easy to put something in here saying failure to submit within the 60-day period may delay your application. And I don't think that would be too far off.
No, I mean, it wouldn't. I mean, it just says no later than 60 days before the DAP is required for submission. Because obviously you have to have it back in order to meet your submission deadlines. But if you don't have it back, then that consequence should be clear.
Maybe it's an inferred consequence because they're pretty bold on saying we got to give you something in 60 days. But keep in mind, they give you a response in 60 days. That's first response. What if you have to go through a couple of responses?
Correct. Yeah. Whether your waiver is granted or denied, you know, and if in all likelihood it's denied based off of this language that they're leading to. If it gets denied, then what are you going to do? Are you just going to have drafted up like complete separate submissions for, we'll wait to hear back and either we'll submit this diversity action plan that we've already taken the trouble of drafting up in case we get denied? That seems a little odd.
So it's interesting that they have a section about multi-study DAP submissions and waivers for that and how you could address waivers for that. Honestly, I don't see a world where a multi-study DAP could be waived, because that just seems, what are the odds that you would have numerous clinical trials that can even meet the waiver considerations? You're completely excluding parts of the population that you shouldn't be. So, I mean, I get it. They have to cover it. And, you know, if this ever happens, then, you know, this is kind of how you do it. This is how you'd file for it at least. But
yeah, I think that section to me, at least, makes it, to the way I receive this, it makes it a little more clear that when they talk about a diversity action plan for a program as opposed to a specific study, like we discussed that previously with, what those requirements kind of were. And you would submit a diversity action plan for a program if you have multiple like phase 3s in that program. So it did clarify in that expectation of what you need to submit is that you don't need to submit a diversity action plan for each individual study as part of that program. So therefore, you don't have to request a waiver for each individual study.
Yeah.
It should just all be encompassed under a diversity action plan for the program. And I don't think they're saying that there's any likelihood or path here for requesting a waiver for an entire program.
Yeah. So we're at 50 minutes already. We didn't think this would take that long, but I guess we're doing okay. Last two subsections. This is kind of like the Section 7 guidance on this is how you file documents. It's not too bad. Before we move into Section 9, I don't think it's going to take long. Hadi, did you have any other comments on Section 8?
Yeah, but Mitch actually kind of responded to that. So yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. So let's move over to Section 9 real quick. And super short section. It's probably just all on one screen. Yeah, look at that. So this is the sponsor's public posting of key information from diversity action plans. I had to go through this a couple of times, but after a few times of listening to it and thinking about the consequences, I thought this could actually be really cool in a number of ways. Again, as Mitch had said, this starts with FDA strongly encourages. In other words, sponsors are like, okay. But to all the sponsors listening out there, given this guidance, think about what could happen as a result. Think about what would happen if you started posting your diversity enrollment goals with your clinical trials. Think about how your community could come around you. You would have community saying, oh, well, you need more of this demographic? Well, show me where the sites are. I can help you. This is your way to communicate with the community, essentially, your needs for a trial. And this is the opportunity. This is the platform so that diverse populations can look at what you need and step up. Think about that. Think about that idea. It is so cool to think about. This isn't just research, is this rare thing that happens to only desperate people. This is turning research into true engaging community for our entire society. And maybe I was just kind of thinking like way out in the stars there, but I can see how FDA is carving this out in this section.
Yeah. I mean, it's trying to encourage, literally, that's the language they use. It's trying to encourage sponsors to showcase the equity in research and healthcare that they're trying to provide, or they should be trying to provide. And I think it's great. Obviously, this from a user experience and website design, it's going to be different for different sponsors. I was thinking about a lot of this because in the expanded access realm, there's that similar aspect where sponsors often have, an expanded access page, with some verbiage, whether they participate in it or whether they don't, who to reach out to, things like that. And, they recommend putting it on the pipeline, maybe tying it directly to those compound names or the study names. So you can see, the diversity action plan goals and then what measures are being taken. But, it would be nice to see as a whole, maybe entire sections on the platforms dedicated to diversity action plans and kind of highlighting, some of the steps and those measures that they're taking to ensure that their goals are being met at a minimum, right?
Mm-hmm. And that opens up the discussion in terms of FDA working with external advisory boards in conjunction or collaboration with sponsors to really take this step forward. Like, for example, if a sponsor publicly communicate, they communicate like their action plan and their goals, like or wish list to get there, so that there would be an external advisory board working with those sponsors to reach that goal, aside or outside from the FDA. I mean, of course, endorsed by FDA, but that would be something that should be outside of the FDA scope, that would work directly with sponsors and with communities. So I think that would be a great segue for DiversiTrials or any other group that can actually get into this kind of work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as well, and I'll give this one away for free to sponsors, but you have you have a complaints email for people that can send like consumer issues or overdoses or whatever those product complaints are. why wouldn't you want to have one of those for diversity action plans? So if you're posting publicly and you're trying to create this transparency and trying to create equity for your products and with the community, you need to give them a way to have a voice. So ensuring on your platform, there's some way for then community to provide feedback. You know, if you're providing your goals and your metrics, to what measures you're taking, you know, posting that information and allowing for the public to then engage or organizations to engage. And, you know, whether it's behind closed doors or not, you know, you don't need to have it blasted everybody's comments on there. It's not like Facebook or LinkedIn. But if you're just receiving an email, so you are able to receive those communications, so you can take people's you know, thoughts, comments, questions, concerns into consideration as you're constantly reevaluating your diversity action plans. Take a look at some of those measures. So that way, at the end of a trial, also, if you don't meet those goals, you're not necessarily speculating on why you didn't meet it. You had 70 people in your inbox telling you how you could make this better. So I think just overall, that would really, really help sponsors to meet those goals.
So I had 2 questions about this, and it's more of a regulatory issue. But if you go to line number 701, it says link from such a posting to a recruitment website for a trial. Okay, when you start linking it into recruitment, you're starting to involve IRBs, right?
Yeah.
How do you think IRBs are going to ingest this guidance, and what do you think IRBs are going to require as far as recruitment goes and DAPs? Do you think that's a future where we're going to start looking at DAPs for our advertising review of IRB submissions?
No. I mean, it might. Yeah, no, honestly, that's not necessarily the IRB's role. It's to protect the patients. Their role as the IRB isn't necessarily to determine who you should and should not be reaching and how you should be reaching them necessarily. It's just, if you come to the IRB and say, hey, you know, we're looking for this translation and we're submitting these documents, we want to make sure that they're approved and compliant with good clinical practice standards, and you know, we're not overreaching on how we're communicating with our patients. And I think that's more the IRB role. I mean, 100%, that's like really what the IRBs are intended for. That said, it might be good. I mean, you could include the IRB in on some of these conversations, I think, as well. They would probably love to be included in some of these conversations. I know plenty of people from IRBs that would be excited to have those conversations with sponsors on diversity action plans and how they can help, you know, or make generalized recommendations.
I agree, Mitch. And Dr. Fox, that was an exceptional question, and I had to write it down. Thank you for sharing this.
Well, I mean, the thing is, IRBs have to approve trial-specific advertising, whether it's Facebook posts, website, whatever it is. IRBs have to put their stamp of approval on that. Correct. So if you're including DAP in those, then it may at least run across their desk. I'm not sure what kind of, like Mitch said, that's not really their wheelhouse, but I wonder how IRBs are going to interpret DAPs in the future when it comes to advertising.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes more sense, that second bullet point where you're linking from, or you're linking to the sponsor's website. You know what I mean? Like that seems a little obvious, right? So if you have the recruitment platform, you have the recruitment landing page that people are getting to, then you can link to the sponsor's website so people can look into that information. I'm a little interested as well as to the concept of, essentially, this is part of that transparency that they're reporting and saying, oh, you can link on your transparency how we're going to meet our goals and what measures we're taking, and then link to a recruitment website. Okay.
Interesting.
I would want to know more about this recruitment company, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and even at the bottom, FDA recommends the use of consumer-friendly language when sharing key information. This is spot on with how to write an informed consent. They are already making recommendations on how to communicate with potential trial participants. I mean, and literally they ended the guidance with that sentence,
Right.
which I don't know that I'm wondering how this is going to go. So one was the IRB. The other one is if you go back to the section, I think it was section 5, where they made all those recommendations about community engagement and things like that. Doesn't it feel like this is an extension of that? Like they're pretty much telling you these are ways that you could do community engagement.
Right.
And therefore, are these methods going to be a part of your DAP? Because that was section 5 was components of the DAP, and these are recommendations like your recruitment strategies, things like that. What you're seeing on section 9 could be included in your DAP, which leads me to ask, how much of this is reportable to the FDA?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Even the recruitment aspect. I mean, if you're using a recruitment company, it depends on what you want to pay for. Realistically, like you can target specific populations of people through a recruitment company. It just costs more money.
Mm-hmm.
That's how pretty much all of them work that I've had to experience. So I think there's also a degree of concern when I was reading through this, where it's like, okay, if we're just kind of linking to maybe a recruitment website and saying, hey, this is what we'd like to see, but you're not paying the recruitment website, you're not paying that recruitment company to actually meet those goals that you say you want to have,
Mm-hmm.
then are you just trying to pass the buck? Like, these were our goals. We're using this company to hit these goals, but you're not actually like really working with that company.
There's no accountability. There's no assurance that you're actually going to do it.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, and we're don't get me started on this with recruitment companies and digital recruitment. But anyway.
So I think we touched some really good highlights, very short sections, made for a good conversation. As we wrap up, final thoughts. I mean, we're gonna go into this in the next one in summary, but we just went through every single section of the FDA's Diversity Action Plan draft guidance, line by line, conversation by conversation, good opinions, good comments. As we wrap up, what did you think, Mitch and Hadi? Overall, how do you feel?
I feel we've done an exceptional job. I like what we did. I have a more understanding of where we stand, where FDA stands, and where sponsors stand right now. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for suggestions to make this better, and for us to really be part of this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's, Hadi, you're absolutely right. It's great that there's this effort out here. Granted, they already missed the deadline to submit. This was supposed to come out at the end of last year. It came out June 29th. So we're a little behind. It's okay. Government time. I get how it works. But there are initiatives that are in process, right? Everybody just needs to be able to contribute and have comments and provide feedback. Try to be as productive and provide as productive feedback as possible so that we can work together to kind of help the FDA draft this guidance on how it should look. I know we talked a lot about process mapping along the way, and I think that's going to be great to take a stab at. We haven't really gotten into actually mapping out all of these yet. It's something we're going to be doing in the coming weeks because we want to be able to submit that information with our comments. It's going to be interesting to see, what we make of a process map and how that kind of looks for us. And honestly, then I'd be interested to know when the FDA gets those comments and they see kind of this process map that we provide, if it aligned with what they were thinking.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, that should also be kind of telling.
But kudos to FDA. Thanks to FDA for putting this together. It was a wonderful initiative, wonderful guidance. And we need to just push forward and be proactive in terms of making this more clear and more defined and more broad.
Yep.
I had the same thing. This is a really great start. I appreciate the idea that this is, an idea in the first place. Not going to be perfect the first time around, but I would really hope to hear or at least see reception of the consideration of all the stakeholders, not just the people that are sitting at your desk. I think that's going to be what's going to drive this guidance to greatness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing
All right.
work. Thank you, guys.
Well, everyone, we're at the top of the hour. This is the DiversiTrials team. Please like, comment, follow YouTube, subscribe. We're here for you. And we're going to be coming up with a summary and some guests to talk about this even more in the coming weeks. So happy Friday, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.